What's up, dolphins, and welcome to the next Flip videos. Today we're going to talk about energy flow and cycles in the ecosystems. These are all things that you are very familiar with. You guys have learned about these in 5th grade and in your other classes in elementary school. We're going to talk about food chains, food webs, and the energy pyramid. For our first slide, we're going to talk about food or glucose. If you remember, in our previous unit, we talked about how plants go through the process of photosynthesis to create food, or glucose. Therefore, glucose is extremely important. It's extremely important for all organisms. In fact, glucose provides us with two main things. It provides us with fuel or energy, which is broken down by cellular respiration, and it provides building materials, which means what we can grow in it. In this next slide, we're going to talk about the plants, also known as the producers in the food chain. Let's talk about the first bullet point. Producers use energy from light to make sugars from carbon dioxide and water. If you remember, this basically is photosynthesis. Light, carbon dioxide, and water are the main ingredients for photosynthesis. Green plants are the producers of food that is used directly or indirectly by consumers. So if we are eating salad and we are eating lettuce and tomato and cucumber, we are eating it directly. However, if we eat the hamburger, which is made from cows, which ate the grass, we are taking in the energy indirectly because we are eating a consumer that ate the producer. Plants can use the food that they make immediately or store it for later. Now let's talk about decomposers. If you think back to our soil unit, we kind of already talked about decomposers. What are decomposers? They are bacteria that basically break down dead plants and animals. Well, what do decomposers do? They add or return nutrients back to the environment, which means it returns it back to the soil. Now let's start talking about a food chain. Most of you already know what a food chain is. It's basically where energy flows through the ecosystem in one direction. It goes from the sun to the producer to the consumer to the decomposer. If you take a look at the picture on the right-hand side, you can actually see there's a great food chain. It's going from sun to the producer, which is the green plant, to the herbivore, which is the primary consumer, which is a bug, and then the bird eats the bug, which is the secondary consumer, so the energy is going from the bug to the bird. Then the bird's energy goes to the snake, and then the snake goes to the hawk, and then eventually when the hawk dies, it goes to the decomposer. Now, let's talk about matter. Matter is basically anything that takes up mass or volume. Matter is transferred from one organism to another, just like I just told you in the previous example with the picture. But it can also be transferred in between organisms and their environment. When an animal dies, that animal is going to transfer its matter into the environment, which means it becomes humus for the soil. In this slide, I want to give you another example of food chains. Now, why do I want to do this? Because I want to make sure that you guys have a clear conception of what a food chain is. It is a series of events in which one organism eats another. Therefore, let's take a look at the example. Here you have grass. The grass's energy is transferred to the grasshopper. The grasshopper's energy is transferred to the snake. The snake's energy is transferred to the hawk, and the hawk's energy is transferred to the bacteria. Therefore, energy goes in one direction, and that is the direction of the arrows. The arrows do not represent what eats what, and that is the most common misconception. Please, on your tests and quizzes, do not tell me that in a food chain that the arrows represent what eats what. That is incorrect. What is the correct answer? It shows energy transfer. So the arrows show energy transfer. In the above food chain, I want you to name the primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. I'm going to tell you the grass is the producer because food chains always start with a producer. The bacteria is your decomposer because we always end a food chain with a decomposer. Now, That means what comes in between are consumers. Which one is the primary consumer? Well, primary means first. So our first consumer is the grasshopper. Secondary means second. Our second consumer is the snake. Tertiary means third. Therefore, our tertiary consumer is the hawk. In this slide, we're going to look at two energy pyramids. These energy pyramids are basically food chains just placed in a pyramid. Now, why is it called an energy pyramid? Because it shows how much energy each item gets as you go up a food chain. So if you take a look at the top food chain, you have grass, grasshopper, and that looks kind of like a mouse, and then the owl eats the mouse. So as you take a look, you notice that the grass has 100% energy, the grasshopper 10% energy, the mouse 1%, and then the owl 0.1%. So the higher up you go up the food chain, the less energy you get. That's why you get more energy when you eat things like salad or leaves or so on and so forth. The bottom one is just a savanna type food chain with trees, giraffes, and then the lion. In this slide, we're going to talk about food webs. What are food webs? Food webs are just many overlapping food chains. So just like you don't like to eat the same food every single day, animals also don't like to eat the same food every single day. So what does a food web truly show? It shows the feeding relationships in an ecosystem. So it will show, for example, a lion can eat a giraffe, but it can also eat a zebra, and it can also eat a hyena. So basically, it shows that you can have several food chains in a food web. On this slide, I wanted to show you guys an aquatic or a water food chain and food web, because in a previous slide, I showed you a terrestrial food pyramid, which had animals that are found on land. So I also wanted you guys to see that not only are food chains on land, but they are also in water. So if you take a look, here you have the sun, and then it goes to the producer, which is the dinoflagellates, then the copepods, which are the primary consumers, then it goes to the ocean sunfish, which is the secondary consumer, the small shark, which is the terrestrial consumer, and then the large shark, which is the quaternary consumer. And then if you take a look, you have that same food chain in the food web, but then you also have other food chains that link so that you can see that all of these can eat different things. In the next 3 slides, we're going to be talking about the 3 different cycles. We're going to be talking about the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. I would like you to know that all 3 of these cycles basically cycle both biotic and abiotic features. So if you take a look, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the water cycle because that is a review to you. You've already studied the water cycle from before. So again, you have evaporation, condensation, precipitation, transpiration. These are all important parts of the water cycle. We are now at the second cycle, the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is an ongoing series of processes where carbon changes form and cycles throughout the earth using complementary processes of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So you guys already know what the carbon cycle is because we just did that in the previous unit. Carbon will move through both biotic and abiotic features in the ecosystem. When we talked about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, we only talked about the biotic, that the animal sends out carbon dioxide, the plant takes in the carbon dioxide, and lets out oxygen, but we never talked about the abiotic. If you take a look in the picture, you will see that there's a factory which sends out smoke. That is an abiotic factor. There are fossils and fossil fuels in the ground that again send out carbon. So there are both biotic and abiotic features in the ecosystem that cycle. Our last slide that we're going to talk about is the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle is an ongoing series of processes where nitrogen moves through the earth, its atmosphere, and all living things. Nitrogen can be fixed in two ways in order for it to be usable by plants and animals, because if it's not fixed, we can't use it. The first one is lightning strikes, and the second one is nitrogen-fixing bacteria that are found on the roots of plants. Nitrogen is absorbed by plants through their roots, then eaten by the animals and people. Once organic matter dies, it decomposes, and the nitrogen re-enters the soil and the air. I hope you guys have enjoyed these flip notes, and I will talk to you soon.